The storm had already buried 3 wagons by the time Fletcher saw the dark shape in the snow, half covered and still as death, but something made him dismount anyway. It was Christmas Eve 1882, and the blizzard that had descended upon Vulture City, Arizona Territory, had caught everyone by surprise. Frank had been checking his fence lines when the weather turned vicious, transforming the desert landscape into an unfamiliar white wasteland. He was a man who knew solitude well, having spent the last 5 years alone on his ranch after his parents passed from fever. At 28, he had resigned himself to a life without companionship, too set in his ways and too remote to attract any suitable woman. The shape moved slightly, and Frank's heart jumped. He dropped to his knees beside what he now realized was a person, their body curled against the wind. With mittened hands, he brushed away the accumulating snow and found a face, pale and round, belonging to a young woman whose lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was rough from disuse but urgent. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Frank knew he had minutes, not hours. He gathered her substantial weight into his arms with a grunt of effort and managed to get her onto his horse. The animal protested the double load but obeyed when Frank spoke firmly. He climbed up behind her, holding her against his chest to share what warmth he could, and urged the horse toward home. The ride back to his ranch house felt eternal. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow came down so thick he could barely see his horse's ears. He kept one arm locked around the woman, feeling her shallow breathing against his chest, praying she would make it. Frank was not a religious man, but today he found himself making bargains with God. When his small ranch house finally emerged from the white curtain, relief flooded through him. He half carried, half dragged the woman inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. His hands shook as he built up the fire in the stone hearth, throwing on log after log until the flames roared. Then he turned his attention to the woman. She was young, perhaps early 20s, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and lay in damp tangles around her face. Her clothing was soaked through, and Frank knew he had to get her out of the wet fabric, or she would never warm up. He hesitated, propriety warring with necessity, but her life was more important than convention. He worked quickly and methodically, removing her frozen coat, her heavy dress, her layers of undergarments, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. He wrapped her in every blanket and quilt he owned, then carried her to his bed, the only one in the small house. He piled more blankets on top and returned to the fire, stoking it higher. For the next hour, Frank alternated between tending the fire and checking on his unexpected guest. Her color slowly improved, the deathly pallor giving way to something more natural. He heated water and filled his 2 metal bed warmers, placing them carefully near her feet beneath the blankets. Finally, when full dark had fallen and the storm showed no signs of abating, her eyes opened. They were brown, he noticed, a warm amber brown that caught the firelight. She blinked several times, confusion crossing her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "My ranch about 5 miles west of Vulture City," Frank said, staying by the fire to give her space. "I found you in the snow. You nearly froze to death." She tried to sit up, then seemed to realize her state of undress beneath the blankets. Her face flushed deep red. "My clothes." "Had to take them off. They were soaked through. I hung them by the fire. They should be dry soon." Frank kept his tone matter-of-fact, hoping to ease her embarrassment. "I did not look more than necessary. You have my word." She pulled the blankets up to her chin, and he saw tears begin to slide down her cheeks. "You should have left me there." The words stunned him. "Madam, you would have died." That was the point. Her voice broke and she turned her face away from him. I walked into that storm on purpose. I wanted to die. And now I am here, still alive and still ugly, and you have wasted your time and effort on someone who does not want to be saved. Frank stood up, moved closer to the bed, though he kept a respectful distance. Why would you say that? Why would you call yourself ugly? She let out a bitter laugh. Are you blind? Look at me. I am enormous. I am fat and ugly and no man will ever want me, and I am tired of being a burden and a joke. I do not think you are ugly, Frank said quietly. I think you are beautiful. She turned to look at him then, her eyes wide with disbelief and something like anger. Do not mock me. I have had enough of that to last several lifetimes. I am not mocking you. He met her gaze steadily. I mean what I say, I always do. I am not a man who wastes words on lies. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for deception, but Frank let her look. He had meant it. When he had first seen her face in the firelight, cleaned of snow and relaxed in unconsciousness, he had thought she was lovely. Her features were soft and pretty, her skin smooth, her lips full. The fact that she carried more weight than fashion dictated mattered not at all to him. My name is Frank Fletcher, he said. This is my ranch. You are welcome to stay as long as you need, at least until the storm passes and you are recovered. Jane Garrett, she said finally. I was staying at the boarding house in town. I came out west from Philadelphia 3 months ago, thinking I could make a new start. But people are the same everywhere. Her voice was flat, defeated. I was working as a seamstress, but the work dried up. The women in town did not want me making their dresses. They said I was bad for business, that I made their shops look unpleasant. Anger flared in Frank's chest. That is cruel. That is life, Jane said. I ran out of money for the boarding house. Mrs. Chen was kind enough to let me stay an extra week, but I knew I could not pay. I had nowhere to go, no prospects, nothing, so I walked into the storm. She said it simply, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. You have somewhere to go now, Frank heard himself say. You can stay here, Jane shook her head. I cannot impose on your charity, I have nothing to offer in return. Can you cook? She blinked at the question. Yes, I am actually a good cook. Then that is something. My cooking is terrible. I have been eating burned beans and tough beef for 5 years. If you can cook, that is payment enough. Frank was not sure where this impulse was coming from, this sudden need to help this woman, to keep her here. He only knew that the thought of her walking back into that storm, of giving up on life, was intolerable to him. I do not understand, Jane said slowly. You do not know me. Why would you help me? Because I know what it is like to be lonely, Frank said. I know what it is like to think you do not matter to anyone, and I am telling you that you matter. Your life matters. You matter to me, and I just met you. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these seemed different somehow. I do not know what to say. Say you will stay, at least through the winter. Let me help you, please. Jane was quiet for a long time, her eyes searching his face again. Finally, she nodded. Through the winter, but I will earn my keep. I will not be a charity case. Agreed, Frank said, and felt something in his chest loosen, something he had not even realized was tight. The storm raged for 3 more days. During that time, Frank slept on the floor by the fire, giving Jane privacy and time to recover her strength. They talked during the long hours, tentative at first, then with increasing ease. Frank learned that Jane was 22, that she had been heavy her entire life, that her own family had treated her as an embarrassment. Her father had called her his greatest disappointment. Her mother had put her on countless diets, each one more miserable than the last. Her 2 younger sisters, both slender and conventionally pretty, had married well. Jane had been left behind, unwanted. They were relieved when I said I was going west. Jane told him on the third night, her voice steady but sad. Mother gave me some money and told me it was my chance to reinvent myself, but I think what she really meant was that it was a chance for them to be rid of me. Frank felt his jaw tighten. He could not imagine treating one's own child that way. "Their loss," he said. "They are fools." Jane looked at him with something like wonder. "You keep saying things like that, things that make me want to believe you." "Then believe me," Frank said. "I have no reason to lie to you, Jane." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face, and Frank felt his heart do something strange in his chest. He told her about his own life, about growing up on this ranch, about losing his parents, about the loneliness of the past 5 years. He told her about the struggles of ranching in Arizona territory, about the harsh summers and unpredictable winters, about the way he sometimes went weeks without seeing another soul. "Does it not drive you mad?" Jane asked. "The solitude?" "I got used to it," Frank said. "Or I thought I did. But having you here, having someone to talk to, I realize how much I was just existing, not living." On the fourth day, the storm finally broke. Frank went out to check on his cattle and horses, making sure they had survived the unprecedented cold. Jane insisted on getting up despite his protests, and when he returned hours later, frozen and exhausted, he found the house transformed. She had cleaned, organized, and started a stew that smelled like heaven. The fire crackled warmly, and bread was rising on the counter. "Welcome home," Jane said with a shy smile, and Frank realized it was the first time in 5 years anyone had welcomed him home. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Frank worked the ranch, tending his small herd of cattle and horses, repairing winter damage, preparing for spring. Jane took over the house, and true to her word, she was an excellent cook. She baked bread that was light and golden, made stews that stuck to the ribs, roasted meat to perfection. She mended his clothes, which had been in desperate need of attention, and made new curtains from fabric she found in a trunk that had belonged to Frank's mother. More importantly, they talked. Every evening after supper, they would sit by the fire and share their thoughts, their memories, their dreams. Frank found himself telling Jane things he had never told another soul. She listened without judgment, offering understanding and compassion. Jane began to smile more, and the haunted look left her eyes. She still had moments of self-doubt, times when she would make deprecating comments about her appearance, but Frank always countered them, not with empty flattery but with honest observation. "You have beautiful eyes," he told her one evening. "They light up when you laugh." "Your smile makes my whole day better," he said another time. "I love the way your hair catches the firelight. Your hands are graceful when you knead bread." Each compliment seemed to surprise her, as if she could not quite believe he meant them. But Frank did mean them. The more time he spent with Jane, the more beautiful she became to him. Her kindness, her intelligence, her quiet strength, all of it drew him to her like a magnet. He realized he was falling in love with her sometime in February, during a particularly cold snap that kept them both inside for days. They had been playing cards, a game his mother had taught him long ago, and Jane had laughed at something, her whole face lighting up with joy. The sound had gone straight to his heart, and he had known with complete certainty that he wanted to hear that laugh every day for the rest of his life. But he said nothing. Jane had been through so much, had been hurt so deeply. He would not push her. If she never felt the same way, he would accept that. Having her friendship was more than he had ever hoped for. March brought the first signs of spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the days grew warmer. Frank needed to go into town for supplies, and Jane offered to come with him. He saw the nervousness in her eyes and understood it. "You do not have to," he said gently. "I can manage." "No," Jane said, lifting her chin. I need to do this. I cannot hide forever. Besides, I need fabric for a new dress. This one is getting worn. They made the trip on a bright morning, Frank driving the wagon while Jane sat beside him. She was quiet, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but she did not ask to turn back. Vulture City was a small mining town, rough around the edges but growing. Frank conducted his business efficiently, loading supplies into the wagon while Jane went to the general store for fabric. He finished before she did and went to find her. He heard the voices before he entered the store. Well, look who decided to show her face again. I heard Frank Fletcher took her in. Can you imagine? Poor man probably just needed help with chores. You know these lonely ranchers, they will take whatever they can get. She probably eats him out of house and home. The women laughed, and Frank felt rage, pure and hot, flood through him. He pushed open the door and walked in, his bootsteps loud on the wooden floor. 3 women stood near the counter, all dressed in their Sunday best despite it being Wednesday. Jane stood apart from them, her face pale but composed, fabric in her hands. "Good morning, ladies," Frank said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. "I could not help but overhear your conversation." The women had the grace to look embarrassed, though one of them, a sharp-featured blonde, lifted her chin defiantly. "We were just making observations, Mr. Fletcher." "Observations," Frank repeated. "Is that what you call cruel gossip now?" He moved to stand beside Jane, close enough that their arms nearly touched. "Let me make an observation of my own. Jane Garrett is the kindest, most capable, most beautiful woman I have ever met. She has brought joy and light into my life, and I thank God every day that I found her in that storm." The women's eyes widened. "Beautiful," the blonde said with a false laugh. "Mr. Fletcher, surely you are joking." "I am not," Frank said flatly. "She is beautiful inside and out, more beautiful than any of you could hope to be, because her beauty is not just on the surface, it runs deep. She has a generous heart and a strong spirit, and I am honored that she chose to stay with me." Jane made a small sound beside him, and he glanced down to see tears in her eyes. "Now, I suggest you ladies find something better to do with your time than tearing down someone who is worth 10 of you," Frank continued. "Come on, Jane, let us get your fabric and go home." He paid for the fabric, tipped his hat to the store owner who looked thoroughly entertained, and escorted Jane out of the store. They made it to the wagon before Jane broke down, covering her face with her hands as sobs shook her shoulders. "Hey," Frank said softly, pulling her into his arms without thinking. "Hey, it is all right." "No one has ever defended me like that," Jane said between sobs. "No one has ever stood up for me. My whole life I have been the joke, the embarrassment, and no one ever said it was wrong." "But you just did. You just told those women off, and you were not afraid, and you called me beautiful in front of them." "I meant every word," Frank said, holding her close. She fit perfectly against him, he realized. "I meant every single word, Jane." She pulled back to look up at him, her eyes red but shining. "Frank, I need to tell you something." His heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I think I am falling in love with you," Jane said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I should not be. I know you just helped me out of kindness, and I am living in your house, and it is inappropriate, but I cannot help it. You make me feel worthy. You make me feel seen. You make me feel beautiful, and I love you for it. I love you for so many reasons I cannot even list them all." Frank felt like the sun had just broken through clouds. "Jane," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been in love with you since February, maybe longer. I did not say anything because I did not want to push you, did not want to make you uncomfortable, but I love you. I love your laugh and your kindness and your strength. I love the way you hum while you cook. I love the way you watch the sunset like it is a miracle. I love everything about you. Even though I am fat, The word came out bitter, old pain surfacing. "You are not fat," Frank said firmly. "You are perfectly proportioned for you. Your body is exactly as it should be. But even if you were as large as this wagon, I would still love you, because I do not love you for your body. I love you for your soul. Though," he added, a small smile crossing his face, "I do think your body is beautiful. Every single inch of it." Jane laughed through her tears, and then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, or they were kissing each other. It did not matter. What mattered was the feel of her lips on his, soft and warm and right. What mattered was the way she sighed against his mouth, the way her arms wrapped around his neck, the way his heart felt like it might burst with happiness. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Frank rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I know what I want, and I want you. I want to spend every day of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. I want to build a life with you. Say yes, Jane. Please say yes." "Yes," Jane said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through Vulture City. Frank bought Jane a simple gold ring that, she said, was the most beautiful thing she had ever owned. They held the ceremony at the ranch, with only a few witnesses, neighbors who Frank trusted and who treated Jane with respect. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house came, bringing a beautiful cake she had made herself. "I am so happy for you," she told Jane warmly. "I knew you were special from the first day you arrived. I am glad you found someone who sees it too." The ranch foreman from the property next to Frank's, an older man named Samuel, attended as well with his wife Maria. They were kind people who had always treated Frank fairly, and they welcomed Jane with open arms. "You bring him back to life," Maria told Jane during the small reception. "I see it in his eyes. He was dying slowly out here alone, but you saved him just as surely as he saved you." That night, after everyone had left and they were finally alone, Frank carried Jane over the threshold of the house that was now truly their home. He set her down gently, and she looked up at him with those amber eyes he loved so much. "I am nervous," she admitted. "I have never done this before." "Neither have I," Frank said honestly. "We will figure it out together," and they did. They learned each other slowly, tenderly, with patience and care and love. Frank showed Jane with his hands and his mouth and his body how beautiful he found her, worshipping every curve, every soft place, until she believed him. Jane gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and Frank felt like the luckiest man alive. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the dark, Jane's head on Frank's chest, his arms wrapped securely around her. "I thought I would die alone and unloved," Jane whispered. "I never imagined this. I never imagined you." "I spent 5 years convincing myself I did not need anyone," Frank replied. "I was wrong. I needed you. I just did not know it yet." "Promise me something," Jane said, tilting her head to look at him. "Anything. Promise me you will always tell me the truth, even when it is hard, even when you think I might not want to hear it." "I promise," Frank said solemnly. "I will never lie to you, Jane, not ever." She smiled and kissed him softly. "Then I promise the same. We will always be honest with each other, no matter what." They sealed the promise with another kiss and then another, and soon they were making love again, slower this time, savoring every moment, every touch, every whispered word of love. Spring turned to summer, and Jane bloomed in the Arizona heat. She planted a garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the stubborn desert soil. Frank built her a chicken coop, and soon they had fresh eggs every morning. She learned to ride a horse, and though she was nervous at first, she took to it with determination. Frank loved watching her ride, her hair flying behind her, her face flushed with exertion and joy. They worked side by side, building their life together. Jane proved to be surprisingly good with the animals, gentle but firm, and the horses loved her. Frank taught her about ranching, about reading weather signs and managing livestock, and Jane taught him about patience and laughter and joy. The town continued to gossip, but they did not care. They had each other, and that was enough. Though slowly, grudgingly, some of the townspeople began to change their tune. It was hard to maintain cruelty in the face of such obvious happiness. Frank and Jane did not flaunt their love, but they did not hide it either. When they came to town, Frank always helped Jane down from the wagon with a gentle hand. They walked side by side, and Frank always introduced Jane as "my wife" with unmistakable pride in his voice. Mrs. Chen remained a steadfast friend, often inviting them for dinner at the boarding house. She introduced Jane to other women in town, immigrants like herself who understood what it was like to be judged unfairly. Slowly, Jane began to build friendships, real ones, with people who valued her for who she was. By autumn, Jane had bloomed in other ways too. She began to carry herself differently, with confidence and grace. She smiled freely, laughed often, and the haunted sadness that had been in her eyes that first night was gone completely. Frank thought she was more beautiful every single day. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jane took Frank's hand and placed it on her belly. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement and nervousness. Frank's breath caught. "Are you?" "I am with child," Jane said, laughing. "We are going to have a baby, Frank." Joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. He pulled Jane into his arms, holding her tight but careful, suddenly aware of how precious she was, how precious the life growing inside her was. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Jane asked, though she must have seen the answer on his face. "I am beyond happy," Frank said. "I am blessed. You have given me everything, Jane, a home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not deserve you, but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," Jane said, cupping his face with her hands. "You were worthy the moment you pulled me out of that snow and told me I was beautiful. You saved my life, Frank, in every way a person can be saved." The pregnancy was not easy. Jane was sick in the mornings, exhausted in the afternoons, and uncomfortable as her belly grew. But she never complained, and Frank did everything he could to make things easier. He took over the heavier chores, hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work so he could spend more time with Jane, and made sure she rested. Maria came often to check on Jane, bringing advice and remedies and friendship. She had raised 5 children of her own and knew what to expect. "You are strong," she told Jane. "You will do fine. And Frank will be a good father. I can see it in the way he looks at you, at your belly. That baby is already loved." Winter came again, and with it, memories of the night they met. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after Frank had found Jane in the snow, they sat by the fire together, Jane's belly large and round, the baby due any day. "A year ago I was dying," Jane said softly. "I had given up, and now look at us. Look at what we have built." "I think about that night often," Frank admitted. "I think about how close I came to not riding out, to staying home because of the storm. If I had, I never would have found you, and my life would still be empty." "I think you were meant to find me," Jane said. "I think I was meant to find you. All of the pain, all of the loneliness, it led us to each other. And I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you." Frank kissed her gently. "I love you, Jane Fletcher. I love you, Frank Fletcher." 2 days later, on a cold December morning, Jane went into labor. Maria and Mrs. Chen came to help, shooing Frank out of the bedroom with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. Frank paced the front room like a caged animal, terrified and excited and utterly useless. The hours crawled by. He heard Jane cry out once and nearly broke down the door before Maria emerged to tell him everything was fine, that Jane was strong, that he needed to be patient. He tried. He prayed. He wore a path in the floorboards with his pacing. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard it. The sharp, indignant wail of a newborn baby. His heart stopped, then started again at double speed. Maria opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy, and Jane is fine. She is tired but fine. Come meet your son." Frank's legs felt weak as he entered the bedroom. Jane was propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but glowing. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket, was the smallest person Frank had ever seen. "Frank," Jane said softly, "come meet Thomas. Thomas." They had chosen the name weeks ago after Frank's father. Frank approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at his son. The baby had stopped crying and was making small, snuffling sounds, his tiny fists waving. He had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face that was the most beautiful thing Frank had ever seen except for his wife. "Can I hold him?" Frank asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jane smiled and carefully transferred the baby to Frank's arms. He was so light, so fragile, and Frank was terrified he would break him. But Thomas settled against his chest with a small sigh, and Frank felt something in his heart expand, making room for this new, overwhelming love. "Hello, Thomas," he said softly. "I am your papa. And I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are loved. You and your mama, you are my whole world." Jane reached up and took Frank's hand, squeezing it. "We are a family now," she said, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "We are," Frank agreed, his own eyes stinging. "We are a family." Thomas proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Jane's eyes and Frank's stubborn chin. He was curious about everything, always watching, always listening. Frank and Jane fell into the rhythms of parenthood with surprising ease, taking turns with night feedings, marveling over every small milestone. The ranch prospered over the next few years. Frank's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to expand their herd, build a bigger barn, and make improvements to the house. Jane's garden grew larger each year, and she began selling her excess produce in town, earning a reputation for the best vegetables in the area. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved horses and followed his father everywhere. Frank taught him to ride when he was 4, and the boy took to it naturally. He was kind like his mother and steady like his father, and Frank could not have been prouder. When Thomas was 3, Jane became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she carried the baby with less discomfort. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace after Jane's grandmother, was born on a mild spring day. She had red hair like her mother and a temperament to match, fierce and loving in equal measure. Frank loved watching Jane with their children. She was patient and gentle but firm when needed, teaching them right from wrong with love and consistency. She told them stories, sang them songs, and made their house a home filled with laughter and warmth. The children were never told that their mother was anything but beautiful. Frank and Jane made sure of that. They spoke openly about how people could be cruel, how they might judge based on appearance, but they taught Thomas and Grace that what mattered was a person's heart, their character, their actions. "Your mama is the most beautiful woman in the world," Frank told his children often. "And anyone who cannot see that is missing out on something special." Thomas and Grace grew up secure in their parents' love, confident in themselves, kind to others. They saw how their father treated their mother with respect and affection, and they learned what real love looked like. The gossips in town eventually gave up their whispers. It was impossible to maintain cruelty in the face of such a clearly happy family. Jane became known not as that fat woman, but as Mrs. Fletcher, the one with the beautiful garden, or Frank's wife. She makes the best pies. She was invited to church socials, asked to contribute to community events, and treated with the respect she deserved. Some of the women who had been cruelest to her tried to make amends. Jane accepted their apologies with grace, though she never forgot how they had treated her. She became friends with some, remained politely distant from others, and built her own circle of genuine friendships with people who valued her. Frank and Jane's love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. They still sat on the porch together after the children were in bed, holding hands and talking about their day. They still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. They still told each other, "I love you," multiple times a day, never taking those words for granted. When Thomas was 10 and Grace was 7, Jane's mother wrote to her for the first time in 8 years. The letter was stiff and formal, but it expressed regret for how they had treated Jane and a desire to meet their grandchildren. Jane cried when she read it, years of hurt and anger and grief rising to the surface. "What do you want to do?" Frank asked gently, holding her while she cried. "I do not know," Jane said honestly. "Part of me wants to tell her it is too late, that she cannot just waltz back into my life after everything. But another part of me wants to forgive her, to let her know her grandchildren. I am not sure which is right." "There is no right or wrong," Frank said. "Only what feels true to you. Whatever you decide, I will support you." After much thought and prayer, Jane decided to write back. She was honest about her pain, about how deeply her family's rejection had hurt her. But she also wrote about her life now, about her husband and children, about the happiness she had found. She enclosed photographs of Thomas and Grace, and she invited her parents to visit if they wished to make amends properly. 6 months later, Jane's parents arrived in Vulture City. Jane was nervous, and Frank could see the old insecurities trying to resurface. But when her mother stepped off the stage, Jane stood tall and proud, Frank's hand in hers, her children by her side. Jane's mother looked older than Jane remembered, her face lined with regret. She took in Jane's confident posture, her well-made dress, her happy children, and tears filled her eyes. "Jane," she said softly, "look at you. You are radiant." "I am happy," Jane said simply. "This is my husband, Frank, and our children, Thomas and Grace." Jane's father hung back, looking uncomfortable, but Frank could see he was trying. Over the next week, they all worked to rebuild bridges that had been burned. It was not easy. There were difficult conversations, tears, apologies. Jane's mother admitted that she had been wrong, that society's judgments had mattered more to her than her daughter's happiness, and that she regretted it deeply. "I thought I was helping you by pushing you to be thinner, to be different," her mother said. "But I see now that I was just hurting you. You did not need to change. You needed to be loved as you were, and I failed you. I am so sorry, Jane." Jane cried and forgave her mother, though she made it clear that trust would take time to rebuild. Her father apologized too, stiffly and awkwardly, but Jane accepted it. They were not perfect, but they were trying, and that mattered. When her parents left, Jane's mother hugged her tightly. "You have built a beautiful life," she said. "Your Frank is a good man, and your children are wonderful. I am proud of you, Jane. I should have told you that years ago, but I am telling you now. I am proud of the woman you have become." "Thank you," Jane said, and meant it. Life continued its gentle rhythm. Thomas grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's love for ranching. He was 17 when he announced he wanted to expand the ranch, to build it into something even bigger. Frank and Jane supported him, proud of his ambition and drive. Grace, at 14, surprised them all by declaring she wanted to be a teacher. She was brilliant, devouring every book she could get her hands on, and she had a gift for explaining things to others. Jane and Frank made arrangements for her to attend a teaching college in Tucson when she turned 18, despite the distance and expense. They wanted their children to pursue their dreams, whatever those might be. When Thomas was 19, he married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. It was a joyful wedding, and Frank watched his son with pride, seeing the same love in Thomas's eyes for Emma that he felt for Jane. They had raised him well, he thought. They had shown him what real love looked like, and now he was building his own. Grace went off to college as planned, and though Jane missed her terribly, she was proud of her daughter's courage and intelligence. Grace wrote home often, full of stories about her studies and new friends. She graduated top of her class and returned to Vulture City to teach at the local school, bringing new methods and enthusiasm to her students. The years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. Samuel, their old friend and neighbor, passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. Mrs. Chen closed her boarding house and moved in with her son's family in California, but she wrote to Jane regularly until her death, 10 years later. Jane's father passed away from a heart ailment, and her mother came to live near them, finally building the relationship with Jane that should have existed all along. Through it all, Frank and Jane remained each other's constant. They grew older together, Frank's hair turning silver, Jane's face gaining laugh lines and character. Their love never wavered, never faded. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing year. Thomas and Emma gave them 4 grandchildren, boisterous and full of life. Grace eventually married a kind doctor named Henry, and they had 2 children of their own. Frank and Jane's house was often full of grandchildren, and they loved every chaotic moment. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Frank took Jane back to the spot where he had found her in the snow. It was summer now, the desert in bloom, but they both remembered that winter night vividly. "I think about this moment often," Frank said, holding Jane's hand as they stood in the hot sun. "I think about how everything changed right here, how I found not just you but myself, my purpose, my life." "I was so broken that night," Jane said softly. "I did not think I could ever be whole again, but you showed me I was wrong. You showed me that I was not broken at all, just hurt, and that with love and time, hurt can heal." "You healed me too," Frank said. "I did not even know how empty my life was until you filled it. You gave me everything, Jane. Everything that matters." They kissed there in the desert sun, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Years continued to pass. Frank and Jane grew old together, their bodies slowing but their hearts still strong. They sat on their porch every evening, watching sunsets and talking about their lives, their children, their grandchildren. They held hands and reminisced about the early days, about all they had overcome, about all they had built. When Frank was 65 and Jane 69, Frank's health began to fail. His heart, the doctor said, was wearing out. There was nothing to be done but make him comfortable and wait. Frank accepted this with his usual stoicism, but Jane was devastated. "I am not ready to lose you," she said through tears one night, lying beside him in their bed. "I cannot do this without you." "Yes, you can," Frank said gently, taking her hand. "You are the strongest person I know, Jane. You survived things that would have broken most people. You will survive this too." "I do not want to," Jane said honestly. "I want to be selfish and keep you here with me forever." "I wish I could stay," Frank said, "but I need you to promise me something. Anything." Promise me you will keep living. Really living, not just existing. Promise me you will laugh and love and enjoy your children and grandchildren. Promise me you will not give up." "I promise," Jane said, though the words cost her. "But only because you ask me to." "That is good enough," Frank said, and pulled her close. He lasted another 3 months. True to form, he spent that time making sure everything was in order, that Jane would be taken care of, that their children knew how much he loved them. He wrote letters to his grandchildren, to be opened when they were older, full of advice and love and pride. On a quiet morning in September, with Jane holding his hand and all his family gathered around him, Frank Fletcher passed away peacefully. His last words were, "I love you, Jane. Always." Jane's grief was profound, but she kept her promise. She did not give up. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, let them support her through the worst of it. She continued to tend her garden, to cook, to live. She told stories about Frank to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive. She lived another 12 years, and though she missed Frank every single day, she found joy in her life. She watched her grandchildren grow and start families of their own. She held great-grandchildren in her arms and told them about their great-grandfather, the lonely rancher who had saved her life in more ways than one. Jane Garrett Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71, on a winter night much like the one when Frank had found her. Her children found her the next morning, a smile on her face, her hand resting over her heart. They buried her next to Frank, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together 43 years earlier. The entire town of Vulture City came to the funeral, paying respects to a woman who had overcome so much, who had built such a beautiful life. On her headstone, below her name and dates, Thomas had carved the words Frank had always said, "Beautiful, inside and out." The Fletcher Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Thomas's line. The story of Frank and Jane became family legend, told to each new generation as an example of real love, of looking beyond surface appearances to see the heart beneath, of choosing kindness and compassion over cruelty and judgment. In the end, Frank and Jane's greatest legacy was not the ranch or the land or the wealth they had accumulated. It was the love they had shared, the family they had built, and the proof that sometimes the most beautiful love stories come from the most unlikely beginnings, that true beauty is found not in physical perfection, but in the courage to love and be loved, despite what others may think or say. Their story became a reminder that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be told they are beautiful, and that sometimes being saved means saving someone else just as much. Frank had pulled Jane from the snow that winter night, but she had pulled him from the cold loneliness of his existence, and together they had created warmth and light that lasted long after they were gone.